Welcome everyone. My name is Fazil Rizvi. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Education at Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and it is my great privilege to introduce Rajesh Santana, who I met about 3-4 years ago at Daly College in India, which is a school where Melbourne Graduate School of Education sends a group of students under the leadership of Daniela Quoro every year, and we'll be sending another group this year. And some of you who are here, I expect, are planning to go there, so you will hear something of the kind of things that Rajesh has been doing. I have to say that I was deeply impressed with Rajesh the very first time I met him. Not least because he asked the right kind of questions. He really sort of was one of those people who you could immediately recognize as someone who was analytical in his thinking and critical in his orientation. And unfortunately in India there are not many of those teachers. There should be many more, but there aren't. So I was really pleased to continue to have conversations with him. One of the things that he's done that is really quite remarkable is a thing called iCamp, which involves a large number of people coming to a camp that is organized by Rajesh and with the help of his Year 11 and Year 12 students. And they basically test the eyes of these people who are incredibly marginalized and disadvantaged. They've never been to an optician before, and perhaps the first time their eyes are tested. The students organize for these people to get glasses if they need them. They organize for these students to be sent to hospitals to have cataract if that is needed. I gather last year the number of people who came to iCamp approached something like 6,000 or 7,000.
9,000.
9,000. So that's really quite spectacular, with something close to 100 cataract operations.
300.
300. No, it really is quite a magnificently important project, and I have to say that what Rajesh has done is really quite spectacular. The other thing that is really very interesting is that the students don't simply go and do service but they also learn through that service. And his notion of service learning is really quite sophisticated and is developing. And indeed, the last 1 month that he's been here at the Australia-India Institute has involved me in having a number of conversations with him, in which I've seen him grow theoretically. I mean, he already had a very good practical sense and very good moral sense, but I think theoretically he's read very widely, and this has given him an opportunity to actually sort of put, if you like, theoretical flesh to the bones of the work that he's done. And he'll talk about that. He wasn't going to talk about the ICAM, but I thought in my own introduction I should. Enough so that he can be embarrassed. But Rajesh teaches biology. He's been at Delhi College for some more than a decade now, and he hails from the south. I'm told from Chennai. He's Tamil speaking, and he's lived in Bangalore and Hyderabad and a number of other places. So that's enough of my introduction. Over to Rajesh. Welcome, Rajesh. And
thank you. Thank you, sir. I'm extremely grateful to Professor Amitabh Mattu, Director of the Australia-India Institute, for having provided me, through the Emerging Leader Fellowship, an excellent opportunity, as we say in India, a godsend opportunity, to explore and understand the ways in which leading Indian and Australian schools interpret, organize, and enact the idea of service learning. And I'm eternally thankful. We Indians have this tendency to be hyperbolic, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Right? My friend, philosopher, and guide, I mean it here, sir, Professor Faisal Rizvi, and colleague Daniela Aquaro of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, for mentoring me and providing critical inputs in my work. I take this opportunity to thank all the heads and program directors at the various schools I visited here in Melbourne, Adelaide, and other places, for giving me the time to discuss with the progress and challenges in enacting service learning in their schools. And I thank Ms. Simone Traglia for helping me settle down here at the Institute and the city of Melbourne, and for her amazing, admirable patience. Thank you, Simone. Okay, so we're here. So what are the aims of my project? Is a three-pronged here, and that is to consult colleagues both here at the Australia-India Institute and at the Melbourne Graduate School, to develop a deeper understanding of the notions of service learning. As Professor Rizvi put it, I came from the service side, and I had this, very interestingly, we have it in our a strong resistance to theory, and I realized that that is something that I had to unlearn, to compare and contrast ways in which service learning is interpreted and enacted in Australia and in India, and to develop a sense of how service learning, and this is really, really serious, to develop a sense of how service learning can help reform teaching in leading schools. I mean, I don't mean the whole of India. I just mean even the leading schools of India. There's such a great potential for learning. Okay, now here is the interesting part. And I take it from me. Now, ultimately, the learning for me is not just professional. So, what were my underlying motivations? Why am I here? What's the reason of my existence, of my being here at the Institute? And I have to tell you a small story, which was a game changer for me, if you may call it. It was 2009. A group of students of some of the leading schools in US, UK, Australia, and India came together for a community service project to help the orphan children of those parents who committed suicide at the height of the agrarian crisis in the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra. The intentions were noble, and the project involved raising a structure for providing a home to the children. During the evening debrief sessions, after a hard day's work, the students came together in a circle and were encouraged to reflect on the experiences of the day. But what followed was, as you would expect of 14 and 16-year-old teenagers was fluffy, unintelligible chatter. After a while, a 16-year-old, interestingly, I wanted to focus on this boy, who was seen as introverted and somewhat disengaged. He wasn't a team player, as some people would say. Raised his hand and asked with some intensity. The fact that he never spoke all these days and he had a question right in the middle of this was interesting. He says, how come, and these are his exact words, how come we back home have everything while the kids here starve? What caused this to happen? A sudden hush descended the small hall. The teachers were quiet too, for a change. It was a moment of truth when a routine service project was transformed, pitchforking the participants to a deep, profound inquiry into the inequities of the world we lived. For me, as a teacher who was part of it, the challenge has always been, from that day on, the challenge has always been to create conditions for such questions to emerge, both in the classroom and in the field. And as Fazil put it, so what have I been doing in the last 1 month? I've been trying to connect. It's interesting. My learning process has also been the same thing of what I'm narrating. It's almost autobiographical. And so this could look very, very disconnected. It could look very professional. It could look like academic. Believe me, it isn't for me. Every word that I've used here, something that means deeply to me. And the question here is, what is service learning? And I've been struggling personally, and I'm still struggling, and I have no qualms in telling you that. For over 3 decades, education researchers and practitioners have struggled to determine how best to define, how best to characterize service learning. Service and learning are 2 words that, standing alone, even my 9-year-old kid can explain it. The ordinary terms that goes by the respective definitions in the dictionary. But put the words together. This is magical. I found it magical. Put the words together and one gets a perplexing, problematic, hyphenated word. All hyphenated words are probably problematic. Transforming the meanings of both service and learning in the process. It attempts to reach out for making connections, as I understand it, between the self and the community. And there is a certain problem here. It's as if that the self and the community is not connected, and that is the reason why we need service learning. And so here, as somebody put it, the problem is in the hyphen. What is the hyphen? And that's been my struggle, and that's going to be my continuous struggle in this field of service learning. And so this would be what I call as a working definition of service learning. And the next one being by some of the pioneers and of working in service learning in 1995. And this would be an extremely functional definition, which is credit bearing, and where students participate in an organized activity, and these are my italics here, is that they meet identified community needs and reflect on the service. So this is pretty useful, but that's really not enough. I've noticed that there's more to it. Okay, it's again a question which I hope I don't find a clear answer, because it's an evolving thing. What is service learning? And interestingly, when I did the literature work, and I'm thankful to the university people here, Robert Simon, interestingly, has had a great connection with community service in both India and Pakistan for a number of decades. And so in 1994, he came up with this fantastic typology here, which I think opens up more problems, more questions in the field of service learning. And as you know, he's very, very imaginatively used punctuation, he has used italics, he's used capitals here. So this gives you some idea of the 4 variations we have in terms of service learning, which interestingly tries to differentiate the levels of service learning pedagogy. But personally, I would say the last one, that is a service-learning, where service and learning goals have equal weight and where each enhances the other for all participants. And this, I think, is the trouble and the difficulty, because it's a serious struggle. And I felt it was important for me to find out that what is not service learning. This is really important because I think we're missing the point all the time. For example, most of the work that we do back home can be easily categorized to community service, where it is the engagement of students in activities that primarily focus on service being provided, as well as the benefits of service activities that is on the recipients. And a little more, I would say, an activistic point of view, where you have young students who say and who come to me with quotations of Gandhi and quotations of Martin Luther King, and they have t-shirts on, they have all this energy with them, and they would probably come under volunteerism. Now, what is volunteerism? I understand it as the engagement of students in activities where the primary emphasis is on the service being provided, and the primary intended beneficiary is clearly the service recipient. These people are sometimes can be extremely contributory, but they can also be extremely difficult to handle, because I've had real difficulties in dealing with volunteers, and especially, I'm sorry to say, of the American kind. As you know, internships and field education work, you're aware of it, but the question here is, what is service learning is still being explored. It's not clear. Dominant practices of service learning reflect this orientation. Now, how do you go about these orientation? And the challenge really is how to transcend them. Now, I would say the challenge is it possible to transcend it? Okay, and this is something which was provided to, by one of the works of Andrew Foucault, is I call as something that I have taken from Aristotelian and in the schools of psychology, is the tolerance of ambiguity, or the golden mean. So where is the focus? You move more towards the left, you're going towards service. You move towards the right, you're going towards learning with no service component in it. And so it's, I think, for every service learning practitioner, as I would like to call myself here, the challenge is to keep finding the focus, losing yourself, and then finding oneself here. Okay, now I think it's a key question, which is something that's been bothering me and it's been problematic, is what is service learning? Is service learning a philosophy, a pedagogic approach, a form of inquiry, or a program? Right. I've tried to explore in this case, and this one important point which I felt is, if I could come back to this, is the fundamental, what I understand, or my theoretical understanding, which really enriched my field experience, is that the fundamental difference between service learning and the other forms of so-called service learning is this key feature of reciprocity, where reciprocity here meaning mutuality between the needs of the provider and the recipient, or as some would say, the server and served, or somebody would probably even go to the extent of the server vis-a-vis the servee. And right. So I felt it was extremely important for me to go into the historical origins and theoretical foundations of service learning. I felt it would be incomplete an investigation without this. This is the simplest way I could put it. And so what are the religious origins? Service learning has been historically inspired by various religious traditions and values based on, and this is both India and in Australia as I understand, on a history of suffering, healing and redemption. And I've realized that suffering is the key element here. Exploring the idea of community and the imponderables of how humans are to live. How are they to live? This is the fundamental question according to me. How are they to live in harmony with one another? And I think, I suspect I really need to go deeper in this. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert here. I think it has its origin in inquiry, sometimes couched in religious symbolism. Probably we need to extricate it from its symbolism and its imagery here. And something that guides me is the Buddha's line of a generous heart, a kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which renew humanity. And I think this is something that should be at the heart of all service learning. Okay. So what about the theoretical orientations? What has happened in the last century, starting somewhere in the late 19th century and early on? I would say I have some interesting discussions with my colleagues at Monash, and she asked me this question: but why do we, Rajesh? And I suppose we cannot escape, at least when it comes to service learning. I have noticed that you cannot escape the figure of Dewey. He is colossal, he is magnificent, he is huge. So we dare not ignore Dewey here. Dewey's extensive and rather broad body of work in the early part of the 20th century offered a strong philosophical foundation of the role of experience and theory and reflection as a bridge. He emphasized the educative and, interestingly, at times miseducative roles of experience, leading to situational learning, critical reflection, and which is interesting for me as a teacher, is creation of new meaning. And so he influenced a range of secular philosophers. I have not been able to go through all of them, but the major theorists and practitioners which had a lasting influence in service learning were Paulo Freire, Kurt Hahn, David Cope, Donald Schoen. Forgive, it's a German word, so I hope I'm pronouncing it right, and Robert Greenleaf. And interestingly, I came across Robert Greenleaf in my earlier avatar as a management guy back in the 1990s. This is something this is how I came to know of him. It was completely out of the blue. Right. Okay. Now, over the years, and I've fallen in love with Paulo Freire, an unabashed Freire lover here, he argued against too much education, and which is something coming from India, which was interesting, on the banking nature of such learning, explored dialogue as a cooperative activity involving respect, where this is something core to the practice of service learning in my field. Is dialogue can occur only if there is love, hope, faith and trust in other person, and this process of dialogue in the environment of love, hope, faith and trust is a process which enhances community, and something which I have been able to generate over the years, help generate, is social capital for justice and prosperity. The ICAM that Faisal talked about has generated just that, social capital. And which is something which I love to quote here, is that his famous quote is, reading the world is important rather than reading the word. I know I'm in the pristine environment of the Melbourne University, but I would say that reading the world is more important than just reading the word. And of course you had David Cope. He had again a background in management, and he contributed a great deal to experiential learning, and I consider him one of the pioneers in extending service learning, and explored the processes associated with making sense of concrete experiences. And of course you had Kurt Hahn, which I've been very strongly connected with through the Round Square schools, and he was very interesting. He became world famous for his opposition to Hitler in the 1930s, and as again friends in England helped him out. And then he spoke about experiential therapy, and he was one of the pioneers of outdoor education and adventure, and which was interesting because he also came from a royal or aristocratic background. He did support a sense of responsibility to humans, or what one would call noblesse oblige. And we have then Donald Schoen, who explored the cultivating and the capacity to reflect, which is interesting. I find it interesting as a teacher, is to reflect in action and reflect on action. Reflect as you are acting, as you are in action, and reflect after the action is done. This is something that I've practiced over the years, and it's really helped me. And of course, you have Robert Greenleaf, and I think his epitaph is fantastic. It's something I wish I had a similarly brilliantly put epitaph of potentially a good plumber ruined by sophisticated education. Okay. And in the last 1 month, and I discovered, and I think I rediscovered, something which was completely new to me. But I must tell you, I'm a biology teacher, but this attracted me tremendously, and that's why you have, and that's what I would use in a biology class. And that messy thing that you see over there is a rhizome. Now, but what is a rhizome? A rhizome, from a botany point of view, is a cluster of roots with it doesn't have a taproot system. It is not arborescent. There is no pattern, prefix pattern, and it's interesting. It resists organizational structure and causality and no chronological. It is always in the center. And it's a metaphor, right? And I realized that even the whole process of learning in the last 1 month, because I've entered right into the middle of some exciting research, my entry did not have any origins. It's just right in the bang in the middle. And so this fascinated me because, as Dave Cormier puts it, that there is no center. You can enter, exit. You can cut the rhizome off. It becomes two, and then again it grows. And this kind of what David Cormier puts it as the rhizomatic learning, or the rhizomatic learning model of service learning, which dispenses, which is really interesting here, with external validation of knowledge by experts and by a constructed curriculum. This is as radical as avant-garde as it can get. And it favors a nomadic system of growth where the community is a curriculum. This is fascinating for me. Where the community becomes a curriculum. You generate a curriculum in interaction with the community, and the community itself is a curriculum. And I think a lot of work has to be done, but this is the way of the future. So why do service learning? What are the reasons that you could justify it? And this is, believe me, it was tough. And this was for somebody like, and for my principal, for instance, back home. This is the kind of things that I would use to justify it. It promotes academic skills, which includes problem analysis, critical thinking, and of course enhances student motivation. And more importantly, if you see the big picture here, is it promotes education reforms to modes of learning and teaching in schools of society. And this has got potentially a transformative role here, at least from where I come from in India. Right. Now I'm coming to some, I would say, assumptions, which here is that in India and in Australia, and my understanding of it is that service learning with explicit faith or religious components, like you have in the Muslim and the Hindu and the Christian schools, runs the risk of being reduced to community service. I'm using this deliberately. It is reduced to community service. So the learning component is severely neglected, and it underscores the importance of faith itself, neglecting the learning component. And interestingly here, I've had many experiences of service as an expression of charity and piety, but it's absolutely powerful. It can shake you, but is that the way to go? Is some of the assumptions that I have of connecting faith with service learning. Okay, so what are the current practices of my understanding the last 10 to 15 years is that it's shifting and dynamic. What I mean by shifting and dynamic is it's again a combination of experiential, progressive, that is Deweyan, and increasingly rhizomatic models. And this is something that I've seen in India especially, where there are different permutations and combinations of pedagogic thinking and philosophies. It's not as we would put it, it's not a khichdi, as we would say in India. It's not some kind of a broth, but there is a strong movement towards nuanced, pragmatic, and sometimes disjointed approaches to service learning. And here the fourth point, being something that I have been a victim of, is that is a strong resistance to connect learning with service in the light of what I would say, unfortunately, a content or an examination driven system that we all know exists in India. Okay, so what are in Australian schools, and in my last 1 year of 1 month of visiting some of the leading schools of India, and what is it that I've understood? I would say they all have, interestingly, extremely religious roots. But the practices are very secular. And they aim to develop in students an understanding of engagement of community service. There's a very strong Christian ethos here. In fact, they put it explicitly, as in one of the top schools, the leading schools of Australia, of Melbourne, says that nurture the school's Christian values in the Anglican tradition. And the other one is to embrace diversity and live by a set of values consistent with Christian faith. So they make no bones of it. But the interesting part is, though they have got these origins here, the expression of it, or the practices of it, is very, very heartening and endearing, because they are now developing a multi-faith program. My understanding and interaction with the chaplains of the school is that they are increasingly addressing a diverse and multicultural society, and I think they are also challenging the current, or probably sometimes even lamenting the current tendency towards irreligiousness or atheism in modern day Australian society. And that was another interesting thing, was that leading Catholic schools that I've interviewed and talked to were unabashedly Christian. This was the exact word of one of the directors there. And in their whole school amenity, community approach to service learning. Okay. And how is it? What does the future hold for service learning in Australia? And this is again very, very encouraging. Is that they help in providing students with opportunities of service learning and take on what they call as the international service projects. And this is a huge change in the last 10, 12 years. Prior to 2001 or 2000, hardly any of the schools used to take up international service projects. That's changed, at least the last maybe around 12, 13 years. It's changed considerably. And this is an important thing which I felt, was that schools are no longer afraid of taking up projects which could be, from a pedagogical point of view or even from a psychological point of view, dangerous, where they're taking up these immersion experiences. And the most, I would say, the one that I experienced and I saw it in action was the CARA, what they call as the Community Accommodation Respite Agencies, which was practiced in South Australia, especially in the schools of Adelaide, where they used to put these children and completely immerse them in an experience of taking care of children with severe disabilities. When I say severe, it means children who cannot go to their, who cannot use the washroom on their own. And this shakes children to the core, and which is something which I have to learn and I have to take back home, is empowering students in powerful ways. This CARA project, for instance, is completely taken over by children. They run it. And the interesting thing which I notice is the transitioning of I would say, the philosophy in how service learning is practiced. They do have this charity, and they say that, Rajesh, it's the starting point. Charity is the starting point. It's something that can come naturally to a child. And then move on to what they call as the social justice model, and I call it as the charity to social justice continuum model, where there's a seamless transition, and I see it's happening. Okay. And I've, in my interactions, some of the most insightful conversations I've had is with teachers and administrators. Most teachers and administrators find it personally and professionally rewarding. They and as one of the administrators said, and they have evidence, or they have empirical evidence, that it helps cognitive understanding in academics as well as the suffering of others, and an empathetic disposition in students. But something which is interesting is, in both in India and in Australia, is the time needed to implement service learning in what I would call a pre-packed curriculum. And the other biggest challenge is after school, how do you work it out? How do you take children? The simple things are really the most toughest things. How do you take a group of children after school to a service learning project or in a community service? The logistics are tremendous. The tension is tremendous here, and some of the teachers, especially in India, especially the lady teachers, they felt there was a tension of balancing family with school obligations. And from an administrator's point of view, how do you integrate service learning into the curriculum? And I've noticed, for instance, that in my school and other schools, if you talk about service learning, they'll say, wait a minute, I'll get you Rajesh. Or if you talk about it back in, I had this talk, oh wait, he's the right person, X or Y is the right, or Tom, Dick or Harry is the right person for it, and that's about it. That's the be all and end all. So it's almost like a single window entry into it. So it's really not spread, and it's not a philosophy yet. It's not a way that people teach. Okay, and for me again, students have been my motivators here. They're all, without exception, are kindred spirits. These are exact actual words from them. It helps them find, this is something that goes on and on. It helps find meaning and purpose in life, from emotional confusion to clarity, and an exploration into what separates us from them, which is, I think, is deeply existential here. The world would be better if we were all part of one community. And of course, again, this is something that an Australian boy from Adelaide said, I hope all learning in school happens around, or should happen around, service projects. Okay. Now here is something which I felt was the challenge. And I quote a theorist or a reflector in service learning because the name of Cynthia Rosenberger, and she says is, service learning, willing to participate in the unveiling and problematizing of the present reality of a society and respond to difficult, complex issues of inequity, oppression and domination. A service learning willing to make less privileged people subjects and not objects. And as I come to the end of my presentation, and this is something that I hear very often, whenever I go there. In India they call it a parcel, and so whenever I order food, they say, would you want to eat it here or a takeaway? This is not something that you come across very common. They would say in India, would you want me to parcel? And so it's a takeaway. So it's not, it's an interesting, this is some of the things I've heard in the streets of Melbourne. So what is my takeaway, or what are my takeaways? And I've got to use them for pedagogic reform in India. And I think this is something that is extremely important for me. Service learning is a highly effective pedagogic strategy with potential for radical transformation of the teaching learning process in India. The quality of teaching can be enhanced by a greater focus of learning aspects of service learning. And this is interesting, which I felt, was that service learning in leading schools is dominated by focus on service. And this is a problem that in leading schools, they do think that they are a cut above the rest. So we have an obligation to the rest of society. So it's almost like, I'm the server, and there is that problematic quality to it. And because of this, and there's a strong resistance to connect learning with service. Learning and service don't connect, they're parallel. I would say, and I would strongly recommend the institutionalization of service learning into the curriculum at the very high level. So what are the more, I'm going to take a huge bag of takeaways here, which is common to India and Australia, is I've seen that service learning is very much limited to the leading schools of India and Australia. But it's not really so. It must not be limited to leading schools. It is not something that is that should be connected to the resources that you have in terms of what I would say is financial resources. Because other schools are rich in resources of social kind, of the cultural kind. So they must be practiced in all schools across cultures and the socio-economic, in India I would say the urban-rural continuum, each developing a nuanced approach to in symbiosis with its ecosystem. And I use this word because I realize that a school is an ecosystem. And the present working model is a factory. It's an industry. Believe me, that's what's happening in India. And we need to transform our schools by viewing them as ecosystems that support, nourish other ecosystems, which could be the community, which could be the slum, which could be a neighborhood with poor people, or it could be anybody. And here is something which is again I realize, and I have seen the consequences of this, is that authoritarian and structured approaches, where the teacher is at the center, where the school is at the center, with a disproportionate emphasis on examinations, typical of Indian schools, may be detrimental to authentic learning experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. You've given us a lot of things to think about and comment on. So I think I'll invite you to open up the conversation. We have probably around 10 to 15 minutes. So.
Carl?
Sorry,
Water, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, go.
The majority of the schools that you interviewed and went and explored in Australia, they were private religious schools, were they?
How do you, again, here is interesting. I've tried to classify them.
Yeah.
They would be leading independent church, mostly Methodist, sometimes Catholic church schools, right? And this is how I've noticed. For example, your typical example would be MLC, Ivanhoe, and they've all had a very strong religious origin, Methodist, and then again over the years they've come together under the Uniting Church. That's how it is.
Do you think you would have found different results if you had tried some of the public schools throughout Australia?
Yes, completely different results, and I would say that's what makes this, because I really cannot go the entire gamut of it, so I've limited it, but I realize that the limitation is necessary because I realize there's so much of work to be done, and I've gone through some. My understanding has been that some of the research, some of the papers and the reports that I've seen, the word service learning is not used very often in public schools. They say community school partnerships. They're very, very specific about that.
Yeah.
So I still have a long way to go. And I think it's an area.
What sort of difference do you think you would expect? Do you think there would be, what do you think you would expect from the public schools compared to the private schools? Do you think you'd...
Probably, as I understand, this is purely, conjecture. I mean, I don't know. I've never been to even to any of the public schools. And I get a feeling that there would be less emphasis on religion, and there would be more emphasis on the Australian version of secularism, which I'm still trying to explore what that word means, because the word secular has different meanings in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And I also feel that it may not be as developed. The service component of it may not be as developed. This is purely conjecture. I mean, I don't know. But I would love, probably if I have another opportunity to explore service learning and how it is understood and articulated in the in the public school concept, in the arena. Right.
What were the Indian schools that you were?
Okay. This is easy. If you're familiar with the Indian system, the schools that I've been part of they're all members of the IPSC, the original Indian Public School Conference. Most of them being 100 years and above, right? So my school is about 130, and you know the rest. Mayo, and this is they are the Indian schools there. But I had some understanding of international schools which have come up in the last 20 years in India, and they want to go about it in the IB fashion. They have now they've signed up to the IB approach. So the IB and the CAS approach is what they're taking. but I still see very little connection between community service and the actual learning experiences in the class. You have a CAS coordinator, period.
And there's this term I remember, it was socially useful productive work.
SUPW. Okay, I did do some research in it. An SUPW, or a socially useful and productive work, something that came out of the work. I forget. I think it was a Bengali. Something that the seminal work that he did in the late 1950s and 60s in Doon School.
Right.
So that became SUPW, and that was basically what I would categorize it as work, right? Wherein there's no element of service there. It's purely to, for example, carpentry would be SUPW, right? Paper manufacture, paper making would be SUPW.
More like internship.
It's really skills, developing of skills. It's not internship. It starts at a very low age, from about 6th standard and 5th standard up to, and then they don't have it in 11th and 12th in the Indian system.
Right.
Deborah?
If you're talking about introducing this into the Indian education system, you're talking about government schools?
Most the good schools of India are governed under what is called as the CBSE, the Central Board of Secondary Education. So it would be effective if it could be introduced at that level. But of course, again, you'll have to involve the large bodies of it, because in India, education is highly centralized, and these boards are based in Delhi. And
the opportunity to actually reform, to change that emphasis from the examination focus to something less interesting, less rigorous, to service learning, would that be a 5-year campaign?
yes,
Yeah.
and it can be a real challenge. It can be, but a beginning has to be made somewhere, and I intend to do something about that.
I have a connected question. Service learning has become like a big global
Buzzword,
global discourse, like inclusive education, and but a lot of the time you find people out there on the ground within the school community, they have very different understanding of these buzzwords.
True.
And as you very rightly pointed out, where there is this gap between service and learning.
Huge gap.
This is
Yeah.
huge. So, do you have any ideas of? And a lot of the time, the resistance, what I personally found with regards to my work, there seems to be also resistance against any kind of ideas.
Dialogue.
Yes, this is not part of our, There is this thing about holding on to indigenous or, ideas, or
I
looking
wouldn't
for
call them truly indigenous ideas.
indigenous examples, and
Okay. Mhm.
there
What do you mean by indigenous here?
something which is homegrown,
Okay. Mhm.
and because I have been struggling with this entire thing about inclusive education with regards to my work.
Mhm.
And a lot of the time there is a sense of, this is something which is, this is part of the something.
It's alien,
that's-
it's foreign.
Yes, it's not what we, how we operate or
This is not how we do
function.
things down
Yes,
here. Oh, it's a fact. This is a huge.
Yeah.
I think the work has to be the level of mindset. How do you change conceptions? People have always noticed that when I talk about, I come from a school where 5 generations of parents, 5 generations of people have studied in the same schools successively. So the first student would have been somewhere around 110 years ago. So I have seen these people come over during discussions and meetings that back in 1960s or back in 1950s that this is how we did, and that's exactly how it has to be replicated. So you dare not change, and that's the tradition of the school. It's a serious problem. It's a challenge.
And also changes in the meaning that, it's not integration you're talking about, but creating spaces for everybody so that everybody's learning needs are met.
True. And I would
To
say when you
make the
integrate
environment
something,
inclusive, to make the schooling environment
I agree.
inclusive.
When something gets integrated, it transforms the space,
Right.
and the transformation of the space and the space for dialogue and creating new meaning is the challenge. Believe me.
Rajesh, you've been focusing on leading schools, and I wonder whether you feel that there's a community demand or an expectation within the community of that school which creates this sense of obligation to have service learning.
I've noticed that it depends really on the coordinator of the service project. If the coordinator is aware, one of the gentlemen that I was incredibly impressed with was the program coordinator at Wesley. I think he had this whole concept of service learning as justice, as something of writings, as he put it, righting of wrongs. And sometimes one individual can be a spark. He can transform the way service learning is being perceived. So I think you need to have somebody with strong ideological backgrounds in service learning, very, very strongly grounded in the principles of service learning to change how it is seen. So you can't really blame the students here. You need to change the ecosystem. Change that particular component, and then the ecosystem, the school as an ecosystem would respond amazingly well to it. So children are wonderful. They just need right directions and vision.
Can I actually ask you, some of these leading schools in India in particular, but also in this country, have right next to them, in the same suburb, some very, very poor schools. Mm-hmm. And the ecosystem of a school is quite often defined in the gated community where the elite school is.
True.
So how do you broaden the scope of school ecosystem so that neighboring school, the school that you never talk to, or just drive past, drive as opposed to walk past, because, how do you bring them into the ecosystem of the leading school?
Right.
What is the nature of the relationship between the leading school and whatever it is that you define as non-leading?
This is something that I did a few years ago, and it was a spectacular failure, but I had a lot to learn. And that was a school run by a missionary, a nun, in the slums of a place called Shivnagar, which was just about 1 kilometer away from the backside entry of Delhi College. Mm-hmm. And we went there, and over a few weeks, we worked with them, and the children worked with them. It all went beautifully. It really went very, very well. And so we used to give them supplies, and there was no sense of we being the providers. But we just got the children just got the materials that they wanted, and so we had some funds and we raised some funds for it. But the interesting thing that happened was that when a group of children one day came into the Delhi College, and this is something I felt, which was because they just rushed to meet their friends who were teaching them. Are you getting it? They were playing football and they just rushed in and they just felt it was theirs immediately. And here everybody was right. The chowkidar, as you put it, the gateman in Delhi College stopped them. He said, no, you're not allowed. What purpose are you here for? Because he was just doing his job. Because that was a school which was meant for the rich, and sometimes there were serious security issues, because they could be coming from children of rich, probably people or even influential members of the public. And he did his job. And that's when the children felt completely disconnected. The recipients felt completely disconnected. And very soon, we could not sustain the project. So this one small thing, if only I had told the chowkidar, or in this case, that just let them come. If I was there, I didn't know, this didn't happen in my presence. If that small thing of the gate, as you put it, it is more than a physical gate. There's so many differences there. I think the project collapsed because of that. So it's always been difficult to reach out, because the element of reciprocity does not exist. It's just that we're giving them. We go there, but they're not coming. They're not expected to come into our areas. So then it becomes difficult.
So they can't serve you. You only serve them.
And that's the problem. And that's the core issue of what I call as service learning is different from community service.
But RAE, right to education, is that likely to make any difference? This is the law which requires 25% of the students at the elementary level to come from marginalized background into Indian schools. So this is the new law from going back to 2010. How is that going to affect your thinking?
It should ideally bring about changes, but I think there are problems at the ground level, and I think it remains as an idea which is to be the success of its execution remains to be seen. I have not seen any evidence of that working out, at least in my experience in the schools that I know of, in the leading schools. In other schools, for example, in the professional schools where in India we would sometimes call them as schools where, euphemistically, where middle class parents would send their children to, they have successfully implemented the right to education. But there have been issues when it comes to leading schools of India. And I would say deep schisms are apparent.
Any other questions? Just one more? Good.
Yes, you emphasised in your talk that you thought there should be a balance or an equal weight between learning and service.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was wondering if you had views about how or what kinds of pedagogies you've seen or you thought worked to bring about the best kind of learning that you've seen to draw the learning out of the service.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
experience.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
This is something that I did it as a project in class 11, where as part of the national curriculum, I was supposed to teach genetic abnormalities and chromosomal abnormalities. And that included, of course, children suffering from severe disabilities, including Down syndrome. And I developed, in collaboration with an institute of the mentally challenged, that is the Indore Institute of the Mentally Challenged, I took a group of children, gave them all the basics of it, and I created an environment where they could interact with the children. And in the process, take into confidence the parents, take into confidence the experts, the special educators who are working for them, and also take into confidence the doctors. So it was all at different ranges. It's easy. It's not, because I realized in other places there could be legal issues here, but it was relatively easy in India because they always they look forward to such engagements. And I found at the end of the day, the children found the context of what the relevance of community service and the relevance of the whole theory that I was teaching them in the context of what would happen. It's not easy to tell a 15 or a 16-year-old, say that what would happen if, say for instance, a child would get one extra chromosome. And you would say it's just another extra chromosome. But when you actually go about finding out what would be the problems, the difficulties of bringing up a child with one extra chromosome, and then the whole thing sinks in. I've noticed that children are transformed. And one of the children has gone on to take genetics as his course in Delhi, and he would like to pursue this field, and he's interested, and now he's a member of the International Downs Federation, so which is interesting. So they do have, each one of us can explore it. It can even be Hindi, for instance, how Hindi is spoken in our school, and how Hindi is spoken probably in some of the migrant laborers who come from say UP or Bihar. They speak a certain dialect called Bhojpuri, so they can probably work it out. It's fascinating. The potential is limitless in India, and it's easy. You don't have to look for partners in India. You just cross over, and it's so easy. And probably the very proximity of it sometimes becomes a problem.
Thank you very much. Stay on. There's some food there. How long are we allowed to be here, Mr. Simone? Sorry? Half an hour. Half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well done. That's really good.
Thank you.
Hey, nice to
fantastic.
Made sense?
Oh, great! I enjoyed it. I'm going to run off, but
Okay.
thank you.
Did it help you in your work?
I think it will in the future.